Namaste all. Good morning. So I came down with a little cold last night. Started to kick in, and I was really wanting to be with you all. And so I was a little bit in denial this morning, and I wanted to just push through and come anyways. And then I checked, and I have a little bit of a temperature, so definitely didn't want to come and expose everybody. I'm just gonna shift things up a little bit so I can see some people, so I feel like I'm not just talking at myself. So last time I was at the Interfaith Center, and I think I ended up online that time as well because my wife and daughter were really sick, so I didn't come in. And so seems to be a little karmic pattern here. Um, so last time I was at the Interfaith Center, the same song was played, Guru Guru Vahe Guru Guru Ramdas Guru and Rama Da Sa Sa Se Sohang. And I thought that will be my next talk next time I go. I had spent a lot of time preparing my last talk, and I think it was kind of some like slightly dicey topics, and so it took a lot of careful word navigating. So I was like, this next time I'm just going to show up, I'm just going to let it rip, and I don't need to plan too much. But then, of course, I spent a bunch of time planning anyways. So I'm assuming most all of you are somewhat familiar with mantra practice, and people who really seriously take on mantra practice make it a whole lifestyle. So the mantra is continually going. So you don't want to have a separation of practice from the rest of your life. You want to be continually having the mantra going. I was talking to a friend the other day who was telling me about some personal stuff, and it reminded me of when Gandhi was shot. So when Gandhi was shot, many people believe that Gandhi said, "Hey Ram." So he chanted the mantra Ram when he was shot. So this is a good example of the quality of mantra practice, or where we want to go with our mantra practice. So we repeat the mantra over and over and over and over again until it comes up to a point where when something disturbing or what would regularly be perceived as agitating or something that invokes anger or various negative emotions, instead of lashing out, the mantra comes out. So a long time ago, not too long ago, maybe 15 years ago, I dislocated my shoulder, and I was by myself, meaning there was nobody like there with me. And I was in a car, and I was going into this yoga programming, and the guy who was at the house, he found me in the car, and I was sitting there with my shoulder dislocated, and I didn't know the guy. He brought me to the hospital, and I was not like, hey Ram. I was not like Om Namah Shivaya. I was very like out of sorts, and I was being a little bit aggressive with the doctors and stuff like that because I was in a little bit of I was in a fear state because I was alone. I've had a shoulder dislocation before, but this time was a little bit different because I wasn't with anybody when I went to the hospital. I didn't feel as safe. But interestingly, when they started to put me under so they could get my shoulder back in socket, they didn't put me all the way under by mistake, so I was still semi-conscious, and they started to try to force my shoulder back in socket. So they tied a sheet around me, and then one guy grabbed my arm, and they're using the old method. There's more advanced methods for this, but they started to just try to like force it back in. And I was really drugged, so I felt like I was like a fabric. I felt like I was fabric, and the fabric was being stretched different directions. And I started yelling, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna. And then the doctor said, up his dose. And then everything went out. And then I came back and my shoulder was in place. So it was a little bit of a personal example of what can happen. Mantra is one path, breath observation is another. So we went to cultivate that kind of thinking. So the mantra Ram, as we noticed in those mantras that we were singing earlier, it's both in Guru Guru Vahe Guru Guru Ram Das Guru, and then also Ra Ma Da Sa. So these all relate to the mantra that Gandhi used, Ram, and which he said when he was shot. Excuse me. So I wrote a really long 3-part blog about the mantra Rama Dasa and compared it to the Sanskrit language. In 2020, there was a lot of big changes that happened with the Kundalini Yoga 3HO community, and that many of us for a long time, we knew about all of the various sex scandals and the secret harem and all of the, the child abuse that was going on with the master teacher, so-called master teacher Yogi Bhajan. But it became very like common. It like really burst out onto the internet and everybody started talking about it quite a bit. So these two mantras, as far as most people are concerned, come directly from Yogi Bhajan. So when this talk came up, I wanted to give this talk, and then I was like, oh no, I'm like, can I just talk about these mantras without acknowledging all these other things? Because for me personally, as someone who is in the community, knows people that were basically like got into Yogi Bhajan's harem. They were groomed by the adults in the community, people who were sent off to India as children, where there was lots of child abuse and really like gut-wrenching, horrible things. I don't like to really get into the Yogi Bhajan stuff without acknowledging the suffering. So this talk is not all about the suffering, but when the issues hit with the community and everything became public, because I had left the community a long time before, I had already reframed a lot of things. So I wanted to share with people a healthy way to maybe look at the teachings of Yogi Bhajan that we're not so dependent upon, as they say in the Kundalini Yoga community. That's what Yogi Bhajan said, because that's always the in a cult, it always goes back to the cult leader. Like, people do weird things, but Yogi Bhajan said, Yogi Bhajan said. So I never really drank that Kool-Aid and I never went for it. So I was always thinking outside of the box. So when I left the community, I had a lot of framing of things. So I got into the mantra, particularly Rama Dasa, in light of Sanskrit and what I call the larger yoga tradition, which would be other teachers, the Sanskrit language, things that have been going on in India for a long time. So, catching up with my notes here. So with all the stuff around Yogi Bhajan and all of the stuff that came out, there were multiple books that were written. There's an HBO documentary that came out. I think Vox did a documentary. The HBO documentary came out recently, and that one really focuses more on the child abuse issues. I haven't watched it yet. I watched the Vox one. I hear the HBO one is better. But my joke is like I'm not in a hurry to watch it because I lived through it. So like, I could watch the movie, but I watched the movie. So so I wanted to help people be able to reframe their practice, and a lot of people quit doing their practice when they found out about all this stuff about Yogi Bhajan because so many of the teachings were dependent upon his authority. But I wanted to point out, we don't need to only have his authority because this is a much larger teaching. So like we've already noticed, the mantra Ra, Ma, Da, Sa is, but when we're doing the Guru Guru Wahed Guru Guru Ram Das and then Ra Ma Da Sa, the difference is there's A's. So I'm sure that probably all of you have heard of Baba Ram Das or the psychedelic guru Ram Das, be here now. So in traditional Sanskrit, it would be Rama, right? So the name Ram gets shortened from Rama to Ram. And then Das in its longer form is Dasa. Dasa. So they mean the same thing. So Ram Das and Rama Dasa mean the same thing. So in the Sikh tradition, the fourth Sikh guru is Guru Ram Das. And that mantra is particularly Guru Guru Wahi Guru, Guru Ram Das Guru, is particularly talking about the Sikh guru, Guru Ram Das. But the name Ram Das is much larger and very common name in the Indian tradition. So, catching up with my notes again here. So we can see Ra, Ma, Da, Sa. It means servant of the Lord. Ram Das means servant of the Lord. Ram is Lord or God, and Das or Dasa means the servant. So one who is the servant of the divine. So that was one little reframe I offered my friends in the blog that I wrote about this, was instead of thinking about the Rama Dasa mantra as something that came from Yogi Bhajan, we can see how it relates to the Indian name and the Sanskrit name. So we're going to now put aside the beginning part of the Rama Dasa mantra, and we're going to go to the end of the mantra, and then we'll circle back around. So many of you have probably heard of Hum Sa, Hung Sa, or so hum. It's a mantra that people do on their breath. A lot of you maybe have not as well. It's very common where people will inhale, they'll think so, exhale, they think hum. Or they inhale, they'll think hong, and exhale, saw, which is considered an energized version of the mantra. So there's lots of different varieties in how people use this mantra on their breath. And it's also very important in Jnana Yoga and in the Vedas, or I'm sorry, the Upanishads. That's actually that mantra goes back to the Isha Upanishad, which is considered to be from between 1700 and 1100 BC. So it's a very old text, and it's one of the primary Upanishads. There's 10 primary Upanishads, and it's interesting because in the Upanishads, there'll just be this one little sentence, and then that little sentence becomes very commonly used, like neti neti, I'm not this, I'm not that, right? That's just one little sentence that you find in the Upanishads, but then a lot of people put a lot of focus on it. It's the same thing with the so hum mantra that people use. In the Upanishad, it says so hum asmi. That means which means that also am I. So hum, that also am I. So means the individual self, like you, your perception of me, mine, I, the individual self. Hum is the universal spirit, the universal self. And then asmi is I am. I am. So the whole soham asmi is I am the universal spirit. The universal spirit is me. It's a very beautiful universal teaching, and it's from verse 16 in Isha Upanishad, and I'll read the translation. O Pushan, Pushan is the solar deity, or the sun, a sun god. O Pushan, the soul seer. O controller, O son, offspring of the creator. Spread forth your rays and gather up the radiant light, that I may behold you of loveliest form. Whosoever is that person yonder, that also am I. So this last sentence is where this whole so hung saw comes from. Whosoever is that person over yonder, that also am I. So translations that are often given to this mantra, and like I was saying, there's a lot of grammatical variations because of different Indian dialects, and also because of like tantric seed mantras that are added into it. But we won't go into that. It's all laid out like in too much detail on the blog. So if you want to get into too much detail, that's there. So Yogananda and other teachers translate as Soham as I am spirit. Yogi Bhajan and others also, they'll translate it as I am thou. I am thou. That old English, there's something about it that just kind of makes it fun. So Swami Shivananda, he says, Soham means he I am, or I am he. I am Brahman. Sa means he. Aham means I. This is the greatest of all mantras. Swami Shivananda from Meditations on Soham. You can find that online if you want to read it. Most of Swami Shivananda's works are readily available online. So there's, like I was saying, there's lots of variations on the Soham mantra, and basically they're all good. They're all great variations. You do kind of want to pick one and work with it, especially if you're going to get married to it and do it a lot. You don't want to be changing your practice all the time. It's not so suggested, so that when you get shot, God forbid, you say, Soham asmi. I am the spirit. I am the spirit. So if you change mantras all the time, you might get a little bit confused. That's the general idea. Okay, so that was my little commentary on the end of the mantra, Rama Da Sa, Sase, Sohang. So I am that spirit. So now going back to the beginning, we already talked about it. It's pretty much the same thing as the name Ram Das, but it's in the Sanskrit version, Rama Dasa. So Yogi Bhajan's translation, so is what we started to see when all the scandals became more public information. People are online and they're going crazy and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I was following a pedophile," and "Oh my God," very reasonable to be upset. It was very disturbing to people who'd given a lot of time and money to the organization. And there's a lot that could be said about that, but not supposed to be the main point of my talk. But Yogi Bhajan's translation of the mantra was sun, moon, earth, infinity, I am that. So interestingly, it always happens when I either talk there with you guys or I'm at home talking with you guys. Something synchronistic happens. So this morning I got up and I was feeling a little sick. And then Miriam is singing, my wife, she's singing a song. I am the earth, I am the sky, I am the sun. I don't know whose version. And she didn't know the talk that I was giving. And so she was singing it when I woke up this morning. And so that was interesting synchronicity. The Rama Dasa mantra is beautiful in that it's acknowledging the cosmic elements, the cosmic bodies, the sun and the moon, planetary bodies, cosmic bodies, whatever you want to call them, the earth, the planetary body in which we live, and that if infinity, I am that. So everybody wanted to know in these chat rooms, which is why I wrote the blog on it, where did this mantra come from? And did Yogi Bhajan make it up? And what does it really mean? And a lot of people were doing like a deep research onto if anybody else taught this, and nobody came up with anything other than it probably was something that Yogi Bhajan made up or it came from a teacher. But I happened to notice that it is Sanskrit letters. Ra, Ma, Da, Sa. The Sanskrit alphabet. So every letter in the Sanskrit alphabet has meanings, subtle energetic meanings. And like what Yogi Bhajan taught, it is pretty much, and there's lots of detail in my blog, too much detail if you want to go check it out, about what this all means in regards to Sanskrit, how different Sanskrit scholars, what the mystical meaning of the Sanskrit letters mean and how it connects to Yogi Bhajan. It's like 90% exactly the same. There's a little variation. So I think it's very fair, and especially when you consider that Yogi Bhajan spoke Punjabi, I think also Hindi, was under the influence of Gurmukhi, which is the language or the script of the Sikhs. So, somebody would have to be a master of a lot of languages to really give a definitive on all of that. So, as you guys have probably noticed, this is a very beautiful teaching. Sun, moon, earth, infinity, I am that. So people in the Yogi Bhajan, the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community, it's very hard, very challenging. A lot of people had to look at why they got sucked into the teachings. So a lot of people have had to do a lot of work about spiritual bypassing, why we give our power away to other people, multi-level marketing, things like that. Yet, my stance is these teachings, especially in this particular mantra, they predate Yogi Bhajan. They go all the way back to the Vedas and the Upanishads. So the Vedas and Upanishads are kind of married together. That's the quick version. Slightly different, but together. So Soham Asmi, very, very, very common mantra. It even went into China as Saha, a variation used in China. You'll find it throughout all of Asia in various forms. And then the use of the Sanskrit letters, Rama, Dasa, is very common. So my heart goes out to all of the larger international Kundalini yoga community, and I really respect people who have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, because a lot of people did. And if that's where they're at, that is totally respectable, especially when the lying and deceiving and the cover up in the community was so drastic. Drastic experiences sometimes lead to drastic responses. But for those of us who wanted to integrate and continue to use these practices because we enjoy them, because we think they're useful, we can see that it doesn't really have to have that much to do with Yogi Bhajan, because it's just Sanskrit mantras that go way, way back. So we all have our work to do. Every human suffers. We all have communities that let us down. We all have people that let us down. And we can choose the path of transcendence and connection, reconciliation, and healing when it's ready for us. And sometimes we're not ready, and that's okay too. We're all doing what we need to do. And so with that, I just want to say, Soham Asmi, I am that all-pervasive spirit. And Namaste means you are that, I am that, we are all that. Thank you all. Namaste.